Well, welcome. Good to see all of you again, and good to see everybody that's joining us at this moment. Welcome to our 21st Kitchen Table Conversations, and my name is Pheng, using he, him pronouns, and with the statewide network called the Mid-Masculine Folks Network again, continuing our conversations on how we as men and masculine identified folks navigate masculinity, manhood, and striving to be healthy in these times, right? And through current events that are actually happening in our lives continuously, and how we navigate those things to be healthier versions of who we are, and to be choosing not to use violence in our own lives, right? So with that, I want to make sure I let the siblings here and the brothers here share themselves and who they are before I continue on with today's conversation that we're going to all have with one another.
Awesome. I'm Roderic, Southall, dialing in from Minneapolis. And I am, again, looking forward to listening and learning. He, him, my pronouns.
Hello, my name is Serrano Robinson. I use he, him, his pronouns. I'm phoning in from the Duluth, Minnesota area. Thank y'all for having me.
My name's Austin Smith. I'm also phoning in from Duluth today. Happy to be here with you guys.
Thank you so much, and so appreciative welcoming Austin into the conversation. For those of you who join us live or who join us later on, Austin is always present with us, but doing more of the technical background and chatting online. He'll still be doing that, and so this is his first conversation as well too with us. So welcoming into this space with open arms as always, and into the conversation. So being that it is Pride Month, celebrating our own ways in which we understand and our own experiences with Pride, as men and masculine folks, how are we sort of navigating that? And what is our story with Pride, right? In terms of honoring LGBTQ folks and gender nonconforming folks in our lives. And even thinking about our own sexuality and how we've come to understand that as well, right? So it is also about honoring those folks in the LGBTQ community who are leaders and movement makers and shifters in community and in our own lives, and gender nonconforming folks and masculine identities. But it is also an accordant that's very in tune to our conversations continuously, is how are we as men and masculine folks, cisgender straight people, however we are identifying, moving through our own expressions of who we are as masculine identified people through our own gender and through our own sexual identities as well too, right? That is the conversation that I think is really timing and fitting for us honoring and celebrating Pride Month. And it is so vitally important that as a group of men and masculine folks that we actually have a conversation about that, right? And we talk about that. And we talk about standing with the LGBTQ community and partnering with them and being co-conspirators with them and co-creating a world with them as well, and lifting them up and lifting their stories up, but then also really looking at what does that mean for us in our lives as well too, right, as men and masculine folks, and what does that mean as we strive to be healthier versions of who we are. So that will be our conversation, and we welcome anybody to obviously chime in the chat with us, or give your comments later on to us about where you are, what you're thinking, how you're moving it, and continue these conversations within your own lives and the relationships that you have with other men and masculine folks as well too. So that's sort of my starting point. I don't know, and there's no real guiding questions there, but like, what's your story with Pride?
And I guess I have, like, if we want to go to a question maybe later, I kind of brewed a question in my head, like, if this makes sense to you, like, what is false support of Pride looks like, or what if false support of identity looks like, because that's like my second point of what I wanted to get across. But for me, like, I kind of like so first of all, I grew up like and basically like all like not all but predominantly Black people of color, like projects in New York City, you know, in the Bronx, like inner city. So place where it's really hard for you to be yourself, literally. Anything outside the Bible is really hard to be that. Anything identity really is really hard to be. So growing up as a kid, like in the hood, it's really hard to like understand that you can be yourself. You actually, it's damn near frowned upon. Let me just say that to a certain degree. So I was like growing up with somebody that is really close to me, like a cousin to me. And we've been calling each other like cousins since we were like 7 years old, around the same age, grew up in the same neighborhood, just one building away. And just somebody that I really loved and respect. When we were about like 12, probably like 13, just really freshly young. I remember he kind of just sat us down. Like we had this little like group or clique of friends or whatever that you go to. We'll have it like 3 or 4 that you just see every day, that you link up with. And he just like kind of sat us down and he was like, I got like something to tell you. Like this is probably all like not word for word because this was like 13 years ago, getting older. So it probably won't be word for word, but basically what he was getting at was that he was trying to express to us that he doesn't like girls. I think that was a time where, you know, when you're 12 and 13, you're just looking for shit. You're just looking for stuff to get into, right? If you like boys, you're just looking for those. If you like, it's like a hot spot for young teens, right? You think you got it all packed, you know, you got the good clothes, you wanna be the person that everybody looks at. So it's around that time for me. I'm not afraid to say that. It was around that time. But you know, you're just looking for stuff at the teen. Looking for stuff you don't know about. Let's just say that. Looking for all the adult things. So but he had told us, he was just like, I don't like girls. I think I'm like gay. So for some reason, I just was like, oh, okay, cool. And then what I did was, which I don't think was very helpful at the time, what I did was I just like started picking like random dudes out the bunch, right? Like just random, I just would bring random dudes that I'd like either knew were like homosexual or thought, and I would just bring it to him. Like, does he look okay? Like, is he cool? In all reality, like the kid me is thinking that this shit is like cool and it's okay. Like I understand where I was coming from. I was trying to be very supportive of something that I didn't understand. But he was just like, no, he's ugly. Just those things. Like, nope, I'm not cool with that. But for me, it was just to the point to where like I felt like I'm not gonna go away from somebody because of who they identify as. This person was somebody who like we got into gang trouble, like also a person that like we fought with other people. So he was somebody that I can go to. We would go to and fight other people together. We would break bread, meaning like if my mom gave me a 20 for the weekend, sharing it with the crew. If his mom gave him a 10 or 20 for the weekend, he's sharing it with the crew. Somebody that I would always sleep at his house, vice versa. He comes sleep at my house, no matter what. Somebody that if his mom see me doing wrong, she hemming me up the same way as if my mom see him doing wrong. It's that mother to son love. And I'm like, through all that, like I don't see you as no different. And I still didn't know why as a kid that I was like so open. Just things that I didn't understand. Obviously I did some wrong things by just bringing random people to him and thinking that I'm like being helpful. And being helpful is just asking him like, well, what is that? Yeah, what does that mean for you? Is there anything you need from me? Because it got really worse for us. Because I chose not to go away from him. I chose to be in his life. I chose to have a friend that was my friend no matter who he likes or not. It doesn't matter to me. I don't give a damn about who you like, you know. As long as you love yourself and as long as you love people, you love the people around you, that's completely fine. I love you for that. But yeah, definitely after that, like the same people who would come to us for advice or would come kick it with us, would try to run us out the parks, literally try to like fight him. I'd have to have his back all day, every day. Like we'd have to like go to different places to chill. Like it was so weird. Like it was a complete 360. Like it went from like, oh yeah, be cool with him to you hanging out with this dude. Like, and I'm like, yeah, that's still my brother. You're crazy. Like I would never go away from somebody. But I want to speak about like how much he actually had to go through, like being that young and still being himself. And now it's somebody I really respect because of that, because of how hard it is to be yourself. And he stood on that, like violence and all. Like this person, like been fought, like cut, all types of things just for being himself. Like, and I don't think he noticed this to this day, but he's somebody that I really look up to because of that. You know, but to express that, like I've been very familiar with it at a young age, not knowing too much about it, coming from a family where it's not supported or even like it's damn near like frowned upon. I have like a brother to where when we speak, he speaks very nastily, and I have a complete 360 like communication on it, but I think for me, I've actually had to experience that too, right? I think a lot of people, like, they talk a big game, but you don't actually experience people in your life. Like, I actually experienced my friend being a friend. He wasn't a friend that happened to be homosexual. He was just a friend to me. There was no other tie to it. Um, so I think as far as like what false support looks like, it's like thinking, when somebody says that that they have their own identity, it's thinking how to support them, thinking how to help. The best thing you could do is ask them. They know how to help themselves. They know how to be supported. Like any other person. Like, I know how I want to be supported. So the same thing goes for them. And for me, with like false support, like what it looks like is the notion where we're just like, when we're half there. You ever hear somebody say, um, yeah, you could be gay, but just don't do this around me. Just don't do A, B, C, D around me. And I wish Roderic didn't hop off at the time, because I was going to speak not to him, but to us as like Black men, because like, doesn't that sound familiar? Doesn't that sound familiar when somebody say, hey, you can be Black near me, but don't listen to rap music, don't play basketball, don't talk about the oppression, don't talk about how racist. It's the same thing when we're saying, oh yeah, you could be gay in front of me, but don't talk about your boyfriend. Don't talk about going out to the club. Don't talk about pride. So that's actually, like, I wanted to speak, that's actually a sense of false support. You can't tell somebody to come half-assed in their identity. You have to fully support somebody there or not. So like, I fully support you however you can, and that's how it has to be. And I just wanted to let people know, like, people who do identify as Black and straight, like, doesn't it sound familiar, man? Like, it does. It definitely sounds familiar. Like, it sounds the same thing like the racial talk is when they want us to be here, but don't speak about our past, don't speak about our traumas, don't speak about our identities as who we are, right? Just shut up and dribble, as one white reporter said to LeBron James when he spoke out about what he's experiencing as a Black man. So I wanted to put that out there for the Black community and just say, hey, like, I hope that it sounds familiar to you, because we can't keep doing the halfway in, the halfway out. That sounds exactly like the racial conversation is. Yeah, be around me, but don't wear Nikes, or don't have your hoodie up, or, don't wear black, or, those things. Don't wear a mask around me because you're scared. Those things, it's like, that's not false support. It's actually it's still very damaging. But I spoke about my story because, like, I think for me, it really spoke a lot to what people have to go through when they're being themselves in their identity. Because my cousin, he really had to go through far way more after him coming out. After he broke a threshold of a beautiful time in his life, he had to go through more from his peers and people. Because that's all it should be. When you find your identity, it should be a breakthrough. It should be, because it is a beautiful thing to figure out who you exactly are meant to be. But it seems like for him, like, as soon as he got to the point where, like, he knew who he was, everybody challenged it and put him down and said, oh yeah, you're not this or you're not that. So that was my experience with it, and that's what really helped me notice, like, it's very dangerous for people who identify as like homosexual, or anybody that doesn't identify as straight white. Like, it's very, very dangerous. So that's why I speak about the support, because I'm always going to have his back, no matter if it's dangerous for me or not. I don't care. We could get stabbed together. That's just what love is going to look like for me, because that's a danger that he also goes through in his life, and he's always there for me. So I spoke on my specific story because it made me better as a person to be able to stand firm in what I knew. Like, I could have also, like, kind of went with what everybody else said. I could have, like, disowned him as a friend, but I'm like, no, man, like, this is my friend. It really doesn't, first of all, it doesn't apply to me who he's into with intimately. But it also doesn't bother me that he's being himself, and I respected him more for that. So
I think you're speaking to so much and so many complexities there, Serrano, about, like, even about homophobia shows up in our lives as men and masculine folks, and telling us not to be in relationship with each other, or not be in and be acting straight all the time, and be acting like we're masculine all the time in very rigid ways, right? So much of, I think your story about your friend, and it reminds me about a very good friend of mine, a close friend of mine. But embedded in that is also, like, my own story of, like, how I found my own sort of, like, masculine expressions and feminine expressions, right, of who I am. And I've always, I think, not ever fit into the box and the stereotypical ways in which men are supposed to be and how we're supposed to act. And so when my friend came out to me, who was very close, and we were in college, and he had called me up and he had said, I have something to share with you. And then he'd come out to me, and he's very out now. And I was like, okay. And he was expecting me to say something different, and I was like, what else am I supposed to say, right? I'm still gonna be here. It's not like I'm gonna judge you, or not like I'm gonna say anything different to you. But I say that, and I'm smirking and laughing too, because there's a funny story that he's been out for so long, for about like the last 20 years or so, and he posted an old college photo on his Facebook about a couple months ago, and his uncle was like, how dare you? Calls him up right away and is like, you're gay? How is it that you are gay? What would your dad say? Because his dad has since passed. And he's like, uncle, I've been out for like 20 years. I thought everybody in the family knew. And his uncle's like, I did not know. I'm going to tell everybody. And he's like, everybody in the family knows. How is it that you don't know? So it's just, I think I was laughing at that, because it's like, why is it that you don't know when everybody is? And you are very out, but I think part of him and being with him, and him supporting me and me supporting him through our own hardships and hard challenges in life allowed me, and then finding spaces, right? Him being in queer gay men spaces allowed for me to actually find support in those spaces as a straight cisgender person, right? In terms of, even though that space wasn't for me, but I felt that I could be me. I felt that I wasn't being policed, right, in terms of my own gender expression of being masculine or feminine. And I didn't feel like people were judging me for, just to Serrano's point exactly, just being myself. Whereas I know that in other masculine identified or man spaces that I'm in, I'm constantly always having to think about, when I was younger, not so much nowadays, but I know when I was much more younger too, I constantly had to always think about, am I man enough here in this space? Am I actually portraying what I need to portray? But when I found the spaces and being, and having friends and building more relationships with queer men and masculine identified folks in the queer community and with other LGBTQ identified folks, it allowed me to really actually just be. Right. And so it was about building relationship and being invited into those spaces and being very privileged to be in those spaces and continuously to be able to build relationships with those folks who identified as LGBTQ, but also being able to understand what is my role in that, to your point that you were talking about, Serrano, and what does it mean for me to actually like really be in the trenches with them, right? And really be there for them and utilizing some of the power and privileges that I have as a cisgender person, really speaking about and amplifying their experiences in community, right? Particularly like in the Hmong community, where 20 years ago it was still a very invisible conversation. Nobody had a conversation about being LGBTQ when my friend came out, and you couldn't look anywhere and you couldn't find it. You can Google and you couldn't find Hmong LGBTQ folks at all. And nowadays you can, because there's a lot of folks that are coming out, obviously. But back then, it was very, very silent, and it was very invisible. And it was something that the parents, to Serrano's point earlier about the Black community, that's a parallel is in the Hmong community. Hmong parents were like, it was because you're hanging out with those kids too much, or it was because you're taking on mainstream American culture, right? Like Hmong people don't do that. And you need to stop hanging out with those folks that you're hanging out with, because you're just taking traits on, or this might be a phase, right? And so they would do all sorts of things, like rituals and things like that in the community. And it was really heartbreaking to see some of the folks having to experience violence in that way in the community because of their gender identity or sexual orientation, right? And in terms of just being and wanting to be who they are. And I think one of my friends said it best, is that if I could have a choice in this, I would totally choose not to be oppressed. Like, why would anybody want to choose to be oppressed every day of their life, right? Because my gender or my sexual orientation has been deemed as inferior and deemed as invisible and deemed as not valid. What could I do? What is it that I do? And so I know I've learned a lot, and I really appreciate all the relationships that I've built with individuals over the years, particularly around, it was so much about in those relationships, but I know it was also so much about me learning and just understanding about myself as a masculine identified person too, you know.
Growing up in the communities that I spent a lot of time in, my parents raised me, in the Christian church, evangelical sort of atmosphere. And in that particular sort of community within that religious institution, it's predominantly a lot of people who look like me, a lot of, white, straight, cis people. And even if that's not the case, even if you are part of the LGBT community, you have to assimilate there or else face, prosecution to the degree where your family could disown you, or, you could face, violence in some cases. I didn't see any of that, but I know other people who have. And it was strange because growing up, everyone, even though that it's an entire community of people, of our population, within the evangelical sort of world, it's like as if they don't exist, right? As if they're like the other, that they're creating this other, that there's something different here, or that they're sinful, or something like that. And as I grew older, as I had more friends and started building more relationships with peers, I realized that like even within that community there was still a lot of LGBT folks, and they were very scared, and once they found out, that I was, I guess somebody, who they could be cool with, they would tell me, they would, confide in me, and as if it was a secret, as if it was something that you can't just tell anybody, this is between us. And it was really scary to watch, because these are people, like Serrano was saying, it's isn't just like my gay friend, this is my friend, first and foremost, this is another human being, I'm, in relationships in some way, I care about them. And I had to watch several of my friends, once more people in the community found out about who they were, who they are. It was very, very heartbreaking to see the kind of persecution they faced by their families, their parents, to the point where some of them were, the mental strain of that was very, very intense. And I'm glad that they're still with us today. But in some cases, that in other parts of the country, especially here in America, that's not the case, and some have taken their own lives, and it's a very traumatic experience. Another thing I would see was this, that these people would come in to the LGBT folks and say, you need help, like you're gonna go to therapy. What that usually meant was that they would go through, whether they were, transgender, or somewhere along the spectrum, it doesn't matter, but they would face these awful sorts of treatments, and they would come out of this being changed people for the worse, and they would say like, yeah, I was in sin, or I was, there was something wrong with me, but now I'm better. And it's like, no, I don't think so. I think there's something very psychologically damaging that's happened to you, and that's thankfully a lot of conversion therapy and such things have been banned, but it definitely still went on behind closed doors in a lot of these institutions I grew up in, and very sad to watch. So I mean, for someone like me as a straight cis male, I just want to know what I can do you know, to be that ally. You know, I'm always looking for ways to try to find, to be, you know, to give those folks a platform. Say, you know, you're the one to speak here, not me. You know, I don't know. You know, I need to be educated in these things and educate myself the best way I can. And you know, on certain issues, I try to let them have the platform and I stand down. Because you know, that's the way I think we can be the best advocates. If we, as long as we can create those spaces for the LGBTQ folks that we love and care about. Yeah, that's what I got right now.
Yeah, I think you, sorry, I was cut there for a minute. My battery died on the computer and it didn't notify me, but I was able to get back on. I hope Roderic's okay, that he probably didn't notice it the same too. But technical difficulties when we're doing these things live and having these kinds of conversations. Anyways, I think that what you're bringing up, Austin, towards the last part there that I'm hearing is really how do we actually show up for the LGBTQ community, right? As masculine and male identified people, and understanding that they face gender-based violence. Gender-based violence being the umbrella term for other forms of violence that happen because of those marginalized identities, right? Because of not being playing into the binary of man and woman and male and female and masculine and feminine, and not like if you don't fit that norm, then you're going to experience some violence. And I think you talked about it, Serrano talked about it a little bit, I talked about it a little bit. And I know that that happens to us as well too, as masculine and men identified people, when we don't play or when we don't live up to those roles. And I think it's particularly important for us to understand that even though we experience that, perhaps as straight and cisgender men, that we experience that, we still have to also make sure that that doesn't equate to the same amount of violence and harm that LGBTQ identified folks who live and breathe that every day, those identities every day, right? Experience, you know, and it's really important about how do we build community with folks, how do we connect with folks in ways that are genuine and in ways that aren't tokenizing, to Serrano's point earlier, and in ways where we really uplift and really center folks' experiences and their identities of who they are and all the issues and myriad of identities that are in their lives that are intersecting or that maybe at times maybe very siloed as well too. And I know that it becomes even much more complicated when we're talking about people of color who are LGBTQ identified, right? Because there's a myriad of more forms of violence that actually happen, right? And then obviously it goes down the line from there in terms of other identities that you may be marginalized by, then you experience more violence or you become less invisible. And I think for those of us who have visibility and for those of us who can speak and have platforms, like what you were talking about, Austin, I think it's important for us to really amplify and center the voices of those who are most impacted in our communities. And being that it is Pride, it's about celebrating, right? LGBTQ identities and leaders and movement makers and shifters in our communities and lifting up their stories and educating ourselves so that we don't become homophobic, educating ourselves so that we don't depend on our friends, to, you know, like Serrano and I were talking about, to not educate us. And I think that that's the way in which I've learned and moved over the years in terms of quote unquote being an ally or having been invited into the community and having been not a part of the community at times, but being able to build relationship. I think that I believe strongly that it is about being able to build and deepen our relationships with one another. And yet I can't still at the end of the day still claim that, oh, I have gay friends and so therefore I'm not homophobic, because damn right, at the end of the day, I am going to be homophobic and I am going to be transphobic, because that's just the nature of how I was socialized and I was raised in, right? And I will be those things if I'm not intentional about how it is that I'm moving, if I'm not intentional about how it is that I'm walking and making choices in this community and in society, you know.
I love that. Like how to turn around to how do we support and how do we actually like create the space. So I think yeah, the month definitely is about like the celebration. I think we can definitely get caught up about like a month being about the trauma or like things that people have been through, instead of like the parts of paving the way and those things as well. So I think for me, like another part that we can actually do to be helpful as like masculine men is being honest about the relationships as well, right? Like I'm not gonna sit here and not go to a pride event because it's outside, right? There's people who will do that and it's sad. Like they're like, oh, I will support you when nobody's looking, or they support their one little family member when you know the light is bright or when the time is right. And I think for masculine folks, what we have to do is show that we need to support people regardless of where, regardless if it's online, regardless if there's gonna be 1,000 people see me, regardless if nobody's gonna see me. It ain't for me, it's for people to know that this is what I believe in and I stand firmly on it loudly. Because what I do, and I think that's another thing that helps is like when we stand on the support really loudly. Because that way it's a bigger force. Like obviously I don't know and I can never imagine like the pain and the hurt that they actually go through. But no matter what foot is going forward, like I'm an ally for sure. And I'm gonna do whatever they need me to do to be supportive. And in a way that is like publicized, like not like intentionally, you know, recording a video at an event, but not being fearful at all. Like I don't care who I walk past when I go to this pride event. I don't give a fuck who captures me here and deems and thinks that I don't care. Like my dog even has like a, because my dog's in LA, he has like he has a handkerchief and he has his leash. And my cousin's always like, but what if somebody thinks? And I'm like, who cares, man? Like, is that what you really care about? It should be about the identity of the people. So I think like that support has to be loudly too, because the disrespect is really loud. And if we're gonna match that, we definitely got to be loud with the support. Like, nah, you're not gonna do that shit. Like, if person, like, if something goes down, I'm definitely like gonna be there to support people. I feel like it's really weird um, how we don't have this sense of identity at all, where we're like, oh, it's not me, so I don't have to worry about it. It's not me, I don't have to. It's like this is a human being being hurt by somebody else. I'm stepping in regardless, you know. I'm stepping in right or wrong and publicize about that, like standing on it, like in front of everybody. Like everybody knows that I'm an ally, and not everybody who is LGBTQ, but everybody who needs to know knows that I'm an ally. Like my parents, everybody that I grew up with that doesn't understand it, um, so that they have somebody that they can come to and have that conversation with. Like I'm not gonna hold back. I try not to hold back on conversations, as far as like the inclusivity that they need to. I think anytime we like, you know, skip a beat or feel like we shouldn't have that conversation because the person's too close to us, or um, you know, we shouldn't say something or shouldn't challenge what they say. I think that's an injustice to what people actually go through. It's a literal injustice, first of all, to what people actually go through because you're just denying it, like when you're around other people. So I think that's the biggest thing we could do is be loud about it. Like, you know, be an ally around every one of your friends, not just your LGBTQ 2AI friends. You know, be supportive around everybody in your family, not just the family members that happen to be homosexual or LGBTQ. Um, just remaining that loudly so that way they at least know that we are going to stand with the identity of people being themselves. Like if nobody's going to yell it, shit, I'll yell it for you, you know. So I just thought about like when y'all spoke about just supporting, like having that be loudly, and what that would actually do for support. And yeah, thank you.
I like what you're saying, Serrano, about being 100% with it, you know, every day and not just doing it some of the time or like, you know, during Pride Month. It reminds me of something, a conversation I had with my G plus friends. It's something that if you notice, like wherever we go, especially during June, if you're online, almost all the websites you go to, corporations, they change their logos to a rainbow flag, you know? And it's interesting because there's definitely a lack of authenticity there, but it's even more to it than that. I mean, some of my friends in the community were saying, yeah, these are companies that are very exploitive, very oppressive. But as we create action in the world, you know, as we create more of a stronger movement, as you know, with legalizing marriage and all that, these systems of power and oppression have adapted and try to like take our action and react with it, spit it back in our faces by, you know, changing logos to rainbow flags when they couldn't care less, and they continue to still, you know, continue these practices of domination, oppression.
Did you freeze, Austin? Froze.
And you know that
I
once
will-
July comes,
I-
did I freeze?
Yeah, you froze for a bit.
Oh,
There's just something going on today.
it says my internet connection is unstable.
You're good. We can hear you.
Okay, did you get what I was saying in my rant?
We get the gist of what you were saying before you froze there.
Okay, where did I freeze?
Yeah.
What was I saying?
You froze around like, I think the last I heard was the spitting it back out to us, you know?
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely like the companies taking our actions and reacting to it in a way by adapting and just saying, I'm just saying like, you know, by July, that's going to go away. And there's not going to be any sort of support there. And it's still part of the same system that, you know, is a class issue that, you know, is based in homophobia and racism and all of these sorts of hierarchies that are artificial, not natural to the human experience for sure. But yeah, I just think that's something I notice, especially around this time of year. That phenomenon.
Yeah, I think the performance piece that you were talking about, and I know Serrano was talking about it too earlier on, is we can't just perform, whether it be allyship or whatever it is that we're calling ourselves, right? Or that we're being called to do for folks in the LGBTQ community and with them. It can't just be a performance, and it can't just be something that can be measured. Like, do these things and then you'll be an ally, right? Or move in these ways and then you'll be an ally. It's not that. It is that it takes a lifelong process, and it takes a journey of even sort of dismantling and deconstructing the ways in which you have been and I have been socialized to be straight and to be in the binary and to uphold the binary structure of male and female and masculine and feminine only, and nothing between that or nothing outside of that, right? And performance is such, and we can see it and people can see it. People know, right, when performance happens. As a man of color, I particularly know that to people who are just performing, right? And women folks have known that. Women of color have known that. Disabled folks have known that in their own lives, in their own community, of people who are just there to perform, meaning they are just there doing the tokenization, doing the things that they need to make them look good, right? To say that they are doing something good for the greater of humanity. We don't need well-intentioned people, right? There's too many well-intentioned people in our lives who create bad meanings and have bad impact, right? And so we need to be thinking about, like, how do we better ourselves? And I think that that's why these conversations are so important, is how do we strive to be better, right? There's so many men out there in this world that claim to be good and claim to be like content with being good, but it's like, are you just content with that, or do you want to actually strive to be healthier and better, right? And I think that that was the challenge for us as cisgender straight men in the society that we live in, is how do we actually be better and be fuller, right? Be fuller in ways where we can be more genuine to not only ourselves and our bodies and our minds and our spirit and our soul, but to the people who we are in relationship with, particularly to LGBTQ people, right? And gender non-conforming people. Like, how do we be in more solid relationship with them? How do we really stick and be in the trenches with them? How do we actually really celebrate them and honor them and center them in our lives as well? And how are we taking steps to do that and not count those steps that we're taking as credit, right? Like I always think about like doing this work and talking about with men and engaging men to end in gender-based violence is not building credit, and you can cash it once you commit harm. You know, once you commit violence, then you're like, oh, I built credit over the years. Hey, now let me cash it. Let me cash this at the bank, and you all better just forgive me and let's move on to the next thing because you can't see me as harming anybody, right? And so I always think about like, even in these kinds of conversations, I always think about like the stories where people are like, ask the neighbor, because the neighbor is like, we didn't ever know that he was a killer or he was a rapist in that way, right? He was such a great guy. He came over and barbecued with us all the time, talked and was nice, and he was really by himself. But they were like, we didn't know that he was such a person, right? And so it's really about, I think, in some parallel ways, it's about sustaining new ways of being and behavior change and changing our own minds and changing our own values, or maybe perhaps aligning our values in ways that aligns much more fuller to how we actually want to be in the world. And that takes us to a place of being very intersectional in the way we move in this world, right? Not being siloed. And I think that that's sometimes what happens, I think, in our society is that people tend to silo things a lot, right? Because it's easier, and it's human nature to tackle on really complex and really nuanced conversations and make it very simple so that we can digest it and we can say, I'm going to do over here this way, but over here I'm going to do it that way, and we don't see the contradictions in that at all, right? And then we don't know how to move in that contradiction too.
Go ahead, Serrano.
I was just gonna say, like, I definitely like the part that you said about value, because it's super weird that like as far as like the capitalistic view, it's like we only value like what's to us, right? We only value like us and like one other person. And it's very true. We have to change that narrative to a more community type value, because if I can value myself, then that means that I should value it should only mean that I value other people. It doesn't make any sense to I actually don't believe that you have value for yourself if you don't value other people. That's my personal opinion. I mean, I can challenge that if you want, but I don't feel like you do, because I think value, it holds in general. It's like respect. Right? It's like nobody's entitled to it more than another person. Value means everybody deserves love. Everybody deserves comfortability. Everybody deserves safety. Everybody deserves to be heard. That's exactly what value is. And I think we have a really big like capitalistic problem with that. We only value like us and maybe one other person. And if it's not them, then we're just like, yep, I don't care. I don't really have a problem with it. It's not me. Um, I'm not, LGBTQ, so I don't have to worry about these things. Neither is my neighbor, so we're cool. But we have to shift that focus more to a community. You have to care about your neighbor, to the other person. We are doing this all together. Um, I learned as a cashier that it really is community that makes the world go around, because I had to deal with everybody's like everyday emotions. And I'm like, I'm a part of their community, little did I know. But that's what it is, right? Like, it was community. They saw me, I would uplift them, or I would just talk to them. So I think we definitely have to shift that narrative from the capitalistic, we all fend for ourselves, don't touch my land, white people only, to the community. Like, I help you no matter the color, no matter the identity. I think people really struggle, like, because when I valued myself, I was like, no, I value everybody else. If I can value me, then I have to value everybody else. So I just feel like people and male identified folks in general, we have a really big problem with value, um, especially when it's people who don't necessarily look or act like us.
Serrano, I'm glad you brought up this idea of values, especially in this like capitalist, hyper individual sense. Especially when we're talking as allies here. I mean, what's more powerful? Me doing what I think at the individual level that I need to do to feel good about myself, seeing I'm doing enough, and what you were saying, Pheng, about, this sort of credit we have, building credit. Yeah, I feel good about, in my heart, as a one person, and I've done these things, and then I feel good about it now, and I don't have to worry about it. Or on the other hand, saying, okay, these are people in my community, and it's a struggle. It's a struggle that affects the entire community. See, these are people who are also, that I work with, and they're being oppressed on that level, on gender violence and sexual violence, you know, that affects the entire community. So it's more powerful if we can find sort of like, you know, find where we have common ground on certain levels, and we can, in that way, we can fight for each other as a whole. I feel like that's way more powerful than just trying to, you know, do what I think will make me feel good inside. And that's because that's not the way to be. And even on the individual for yourself, that's damaging to you. You know, it alienates you from your neighbors. It alienates you from your entire neighborhood, your class, everything. So I think that's I'm glad you guys brought that stuff up. So that's crucial.
And it's hard. I think it is challenging, but and yet I think it's also very easy at the same time to actually be thinking in and moving in that kind of a way of where we're thinking about other people, and we're thinking about other people's needs and wants, particularly because I think as men and masculine folks, we've been socialized to only think about ourselves and only be thinking that other people should be caring for us and our needs, you know? But if we can turn that around and think about how do we care for other people's needs and wants, like emotionally, not just intellectually, but emotionally, not just materialistically only, but emotionally, in soulful ways and spiritual ways, and then intellectually as well too, is really important, right? And I think that that's what we're talking about here. We're not talking about like the materialistic things that we have been taught as men and masculine folks to just give to people or to just protect people in those very external ways, but like in the very internal ways of just being there. Like going back to our earlier conversation where Serrano and I were both sharing about our friendships, is that's what I was my friend was there for me emotionally through hardships and through joys and through sorrows. And I walked with him and he walked with me. It wasn't only a one-way street. We did it for each other. And we could talk and have these kinds of conversations for an hour and 30 minutes or 40 minutes where we're not just saying, hey, buddy, you know, everybody goes through that, but like really genuinely being there for each other and listening to each other and really supporting each other in that way. Similar to the conversation we had 2 weeks ago about healing and about being in collective healing spaces with one another, right? It's, we didn't think of it that way. I didn't think that was what it was, but in some ways it was about healing my own gender identity and my own sexual orientation, and me understanding that it was okay for me to express myself in whatever ways that I wanted to actually express myself, right? And so I think about all those things, and I think about like, our conversation here is performance isn't going to get us anywhere. It's actually detrimental, and it's actually harmful. And so if we're going to be real about these things, I think we need to be very honest to ourselves and be real about it and show up very loudly, like Serrano said, and very proud, and not be dependent on those who are in the marginalized communities, quote unquote, to be backing us up. Even if I'm the only one standing, I should be the only one standing and talking about these things, you know.
I think another important thing, you know, as we're in a space where we are masculine folks talking here, is knowing that, you know, within each person there is, you know, both masculine and feminine, and that we all, you know, move in those spaces, and that we, you know, find ourselves in different parts of that spectrum, you know, no matter how we identify. If we identify as straight cis males, there we still have some aspects of our personhood that are feminine in some ways. And instead of, you know, shying away from them, just accepting that that's just how human beings are. that we are all around that. And so all the more reason to support those who find themselves more on one side of the spectrum. So I feel like that's really important. Understand that within all of us, we have, these different angles, different sides to us. It makes me think about the author Ernest Hemingway. He was around in an age where it was very criminalized, but he was a gay man, or at least he was bisexual. But he felt the need to have this sort of, kind of unfortunate, but this hyper masculinity to be, the hunter, the fisherman, the adventurer, and this need to deny his self, who he really was, and it caused him a lot of suffering too. So in that way, that's kind of a sadder story, but then there's plenty of other stories that are happier and that we need to celebrate and bring those stories, people who overcame, and were able to understand and, accepting themselves wherever they are in that spectrum. That's a way of, I guess, self-actualizing or becoming more in tune with who you are, and understanding your emotions better. And so, why would I ever want to not help someone achieve that, especially someone I care about? It's because it's not my experience. I mean, it really is your experience on some level. So I think that's really important to understand.
Yeah, I think that's a good sort of ending point there, Austin, is like the realizing and being genuine and kind of authentic to yourself. I think that many folks in the queer community and LGBTQ folks who I've had relationship with has shown that to me and has taught me that. And so I'm really appreciative of those relationships and of those individuals who pave the way to be who they want to be and to be who they are and to show that to the world and to say that this is where I'm at and this is I'm going to be living my values out that we were talking about earlier. And so I have seen that through a number of friendships and through a number of community leaders and movement makers in the LGBTQ community, not just in the Pheng community, but in other communities as well too. And so really appreciating and honoring them and holding space for them and space for their leadership and lifting their leadership up as well too. There's a lot of them, but I really want to make sure that it's about celebrating them, not just in June, but every single day of my life as well too. So I'm going to close on that note and allow for the two of you to also share your closing thoughts, and then I will close out us out fully then.
I'll just go kind of like off of how I'm feeling, like feeling good to have this conversation, feeling blessed. Um, and yeah, just definitely want to lead with love and looking more towards positive instead of, because I'm also a person that can get wrapped up in that as far as like, February or June, between those months of like what we've been through. So it's definitely about the celebration, like paving the way. And yeah, so thank y'all for having me again.
I just want to shout out to all the LGBT plus folks that have taught me and educated me and have, shown me what their experiences are like and their struggle is like, so that, that I can be a better ally. I just want to honor all those people out there, who you are, those people that I'm in relationship with and that I love and care about. So that's my closing thought.
Well, thank you. Appreciating both of you, Serrano and Austin, and thank you, Roderic, for joining us briefly. We know your power went out of your house, so hopefully you're good, and thank God it's a sunny day and it's nice out somewhat, and so hopefully you'll be able to find some cool shade to stay in since you're out of AC. The luxury of living in the first world, world, I should say, is we have AC. But anyways, appreciating for those of you who are joining us as well too, live in this moment and partaking in this conversation, participating and carrying it forward in your own lives, celebrating the lives of LGBTQ individuals who have contributed to make our lives much more fuller and richer, and celebrating Pride Month all month as well too. I think it's really important and crucial that we as men and masculine folks really learn how to navigate and stand in good solidarity with LGBTQ folks. So appreciating this conversation as well. And again, thanks to our philanthropy partners, the Blue Cross Blue Shield and the Novo Foundation for the continuous generous support to be able to have us be able to have these kinds of conversations and continue this platform as well too. And until next time, as always, we are here every other Thursday, shaping new meanings of masculinity and manhood through our conversations. And so join us in 2 weeks and we will be back here right at noon, same time, same place with maybe different people or the same people. Thank you both. Take care.